Hello everybody and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be talking about how to DM for Druids. Now this is interesting for me to want to go into. I'm planning on making a series out of this where I talk about each of the classes and how to DM for them, but I noticed when I was looking for it, there's a lot of stuff on how to play certain classes, how to role play certain classes, but not a lot on how to DM for them. And as somebody who started my very first game as a DM, I had a lot of trouble with figuring out the different classes and what they were supposed to do. So I'm just going to go through these kind of short videos where I talk about different classes and what you can do when you are DMing for them for the first time and pitfalls to watch out for. So let's begin. Now, why am I starting with Druid? Well, in the first campaign I ever ran, one of my players was playing a Druid, and they were very clever and very creative, and I didn't know what to do. And I ended up nerfing some things about what they could do that was not fair to them. And so I think there's a lot of things that I could have done better, and I'm just going to kind of go discussing about that. So the first thing about Druids are one of the tankier and more flexible classes. The Wizard is the utility caster, but the Druid is a close second because they have a ton of prepared spells that do a lot of stuff, and they also tend to be a little bit tankier because they have access to something called Wild Shape that also lets them get around and do a lot of utility. So it is very difficult for a DM to be able to run for them because they can do so much. So let's start with Wild Shaping. Imagine, if you will, you've set up your first encounter. There is a dungeon with goblins in it, a classic. You've set it up so that there's different tiers in this cave, and there are goblins on each tier, and they are aware that the players are coming, so they have actually gone up and they have prepared an ambush on each tier where they will fire down arrows on the players as they approach into the cave. It's cool, it's dramatic, you've planned it out, and it's strategic, and it will be a challenge for these players. The Druid turns into a rat and sneaks into the cave and sees all this and lets the players know, and they decide to just go ahead and gas out the cave. Well, one, that's a pretty creative solution, but unfortunately, it kind of ruined your encounter. And as a DM, it's very easy to get frustrated with Wild Shape. So the next time you have something very similar, another encounter where they have to sneak into a place, but this time there are rat traps all around the floor to prevent the Druid from doing that. One, a little specific and kind of unfair, but okay, maybe you're just really trying to challenge your players. The Druid turns into a bat and does the same thing this time. You'll run into this consistently. There is such a wide array of things the Druid can turn into that it is almost impossible to actually prepare for. And so a lot of the times it leads to the DM wanting to nerf Wild Shape in some way. Please don't do this. Instead, I'm going to give you a few tips of how to work around with it and be able to use it in a way that helps the players and enhances the story. So the first thing that you should know is there's a section that talks about the fact that Druids can only Wild Shape into animals that they have seen. Now, don't make this only animals that they've seen in the campaign because that does limit them a lot. They are a Druid. They are ingrained in nature. They will know a lot of animals when I've seen a lot of animals. But what you should do is work with your player to learn what animals they have seen and have them approve some of the more outlandish animals ahead of time so you can be prepared for it. The other thing is to make sure you have the stats ahead of time. Tell the player to be prepared when they turn into an animal. They can get cards for these things, or you can easily Google anything you need. You can Google rat D&D 5e, you can Google squirrel D&D 5e, and it'll bring up stats. And if you can't find stats for it, you can usually find a creature that is similar enough to be able to go with it. But make sure that they have those stats ahead of time so that they can give them to you or you have them, so it's not too complicated in the moment of trying to figure it out. And the other thing that you can do is treat things realistically. When they turn into these animals, they're not just unnoticed. If a rat is going to sneak into a cave with a bunch of goblins, my first thought is you better make a stealth check, because if I'm a goblin and I see that rat, that's a snack. I'm gonna go get it. Same thing, if you see a bird flying around in a building, when you see a bird in a building, you don't ignore it. You follow it around and you try to get it out. You're not just like, oh, look, there goes a bird. So the Druid is not invisible, especially when they turn into small insects. They need to make those stealth checks, because if you see an insect, you don't leave it alone. You want to get rid of it. If there's a spider or a mosquito or a wasp, you want to kill that thing. So treat it realistically and make sure they have the stats on hand and let them use it creatively, and especially do let them use it to scout places out, but don't focus too much on that. If a player is going to scout someplace out, I wouldn't focus too much on that for too long because it'll alienate the other players. Just reduce it down to a couple of rolls and let them know what they see. But at the end of the day, I would let them use it and be creative with it. Just be realistic. There are things that would prevent them. They can't just go anywhere because they can turn into these animals. The last thing about Wild Shape is there's a specific subclass that uses Wild Shapes a lot more than the rest, and it's Moon Druids. As a new DM, I would really watch out for Moon Druids because they can be hugely problematic if you're not careful. Unfortunately, when they were created, they were one of the first subclasses created in D&D 5th edition for Druids. And one of the things that they do is they let players wild shape to stronger things faster and more consistently. The problem is that they don't give any real restrictions on what they can turn into. They say, yeah, you can only turn into these certain challenge ratings, but challenge ratings is not an exact science. And you can very easily get to the point where, especially in early levels, the druid turns into a monster that could literally take on the whole party. And suddenly you just have this one player who's way more powerful than the rest. And they get a lot of extra HP because when they wild shape, you get to use the entire monster's health pool before you revert back to yourself and get your own health pool. So they can be very, very powerful, especially compared to the rest of the party. So I'd be very careful when using moon druids. And if a player wants to play that, really keep a close eye and work with them on what creatures they're turning into so you don't have too many problems. The next thing that I would watch out for is spellcasting. Druids have a huge list of spells that they can pick from every single day. That can confuse the player and you. So what I would do is make sure that you have spell cards. Either you buy some, you make some, you print some out, but you have spell cards so that when a player breaks out a spell you don't know, you both have something there to reference and you don't have to spend time getting bogged down trying to figure it out. The other option of this is D&D Beyond. D&D Beyond is a great resource to be able to keep track of all these spells, but not everybody can afford that kind of stuff, and I understand that. So spell cards are a great second option to be able to do that, but make sure you have the knowledge of the spells in front of you so that you don't have to bog down the game or get too confused with what's going on. I did that a lot, and if I had just had spell cards, it would have made my life a whole lot easier. And then the next thing I want to talk about is a little tidbit that I don't know if it's really relevant, but it was something that was created in the original Player's Handbook and can be a little bit weird. And it's the fact that according to the books, druids can't wear metal armor. And according to the D&D designers themselves, when a druid wears metal armor, they explode. This is kind of an archaic and old rule from traditions of past editions. There is no real mechanical reason they can't wear metal armor. If you want to allow them to, that is fine. It's not a huge deal, but I did just want to throw that out there in case that comes up and you just sit there and go, well, why can't druids wear metal armor? Is there a reason for that? It's really just because druids couldn't wear metal armor in older editions. If you want to change that, that's fine. If not, hey, roll with it. It's a cool roleplay thing, but yeah, just keep that in mind and don't let that trip you up too much. So moving on, as druids level up, a lot of them get different abilities that they can use in place of their wild shape, which allow them to take these different forms. Spore Druid and Circle of Stars Druid are great examples of this. So is Wildfire Druid, though theirs is a little different. It allows them to summon something instead of taking a different form. And I do want you to know that when they take those forms, they will be very powerful. Taking those forms makes these players and characters a lot more powerful than the rest of the group sometimes. It is easy enough to balance this out. Put multiple combat encounters in a session because they only have limited amounts of these. And a lot of the times, if you just allow them to turn into it every time they get into a combat encounter, they'll just be that powerful. And so make it a choice that they have to choose. And that's a real simple solution to that. Other than that, I mean, they don't become too powerful. It's just a lot of times those forms they take can be very powerful. And so that if that is an issue for you, multiple combat encounters before rest is very helpful. And then lastly, I want to talk about the 20th level capstone. If you're a new DM, you really shouldn't be dealing with this. You should not be starting at 20th level. But if you are, for whatever strange reason, druids have the best or one of the best 20th level capstones there is because it allows them to have infinite wild shapes. And if you remember and were paying attention earlier in the video, when you have infinite wild shapes, that means you have infinite HP technically, because every time that your health goes down to the bottom, you turn back into yourself. So you have 2 HP pools, and at the next round, you can just go ahead and turn into another animal. So you have so much HP, and it can be incredibly powerful, especially for moon druids. So if you are at 20th level, just be aware of how powerful that is. I don't really know how to help you with that. 20th level is kind of meant to be insane. For some of the classes, it's really underwhelming. For some of them, it's way too powerful. But just keep that in mind. So I hope this helped. This was a little bit of a shorter video, just me telling you my thoughts about DMing for druids. I do plan on doing some of these short videos for each of the classes, but hopefully that can help you guys out and give you some information on what you need to be able to DM effectively for a druid for the first time. So I hope all of you have a wonderful day. I hope you go out into the world and make it your own. Don't let anything get you down, and never forget to play your role. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.